Anyway, here's something about Madison Square Garden that I thought you might help me out with because I just saw this email this morning. I said, well, let's bring it up because it's from Mark Cole, our friend in Colorado who does the Odessa Steps magazine. And he sent an email. He said, I came across the show from Madison Square Garden on February 26, 1973. And on that show, Brian, were Dory, and he says Dory Funk Sr., Terry Funk, Mil Mascaras, Vern Gagne defending the AWA title. And basically, he says, on the surface, this seems fishy. Why were 3 other promoters working on a Madison Square Garden card in early 1973? Any thoughts or stories you may have heard? And I looked up the card for that night. And basically, I wanted you to tell me, because you got a better grip off top of your head on history. If you remember, when did Vince Sr. rejoin the NWA?
I would have to look it up. I would think early 70s, 72, 73, somewhere in that range.
Well, there you go. And I was thinking the same thing. And Mark said one theory that he had heard, it had to do with the Wrestler movie.
I was going to bring that up because I was just thinking timeline-wise, that came out in 74. So that's a year later if they were trying to... I don't think it was a big negotiation to get Vince to do his part in the movie, but, they were talking.
Well, see, actually... I think it may have been incidental at best. Hey, we're going to be in New York. Let's fucking get a camera to shoot Vince or whatever the fuck, right? What I'm thinking, because that would take care of Vern. Vern was obviously heavily involved in the Wrestler, but why would the Funks be showing up all of a sudden? And also, all that year, there were other outside territory guys. Ron Fuller was there, I think, that fall.
Those guys all have something in common, the Funks and Ron Fuller. It was coming from Eddie Graham.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. At that point, I think that since Vince Sr. had agreed to rejoin the NWA, and that's when they started saying WWF champion instead of world champion on TV and etc. I think he was trying to show Eddie Graham, okay, I'll bring some of your guys, because it was mostly Florida guys. And Jack Briscoe was up, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was, because we have said before when we've talked about this, if Eddie Graham had lived, he probably would have had some type of major involvement by the end of it with Vince Jr. because of his long association with Vince Sr. The WWF, Vince Sr. and Willie Gilzenberg, all those guys, the Office guys, they always had homes in Florida. They vacationed down there. They socialized. And there was a pipeline there. And so I think that in answer to Mark's question, it was just that Vince Sr. and Eddie Graham were probably the closest of Vince and any NWA promoter. So that was a relationship that they worked out. And because remember, J.J. Dillon even got the chance to wrestle in Madison Square Garden.
He was the last one.
He was the last one. But listen to this card. By the way, hold on now. I just moved my goddamn
Florida
screen.
TV was on in New York on the Spanish channel.
Well, yes. And that's why some of the, fans already knew who the Florida guys were. And at the same time, Vince never really did anything to try to prevent that or stop it or, he
allowed it.
Fuck with it. They cooperated. Yeah. But anyway,
what was the other one that aired in New York eventually? L.A., Mike LaBelle. And that was because, again, the rosy relationship between that office and the McMahons.
Yeah. And, that way, especially, I guess Vince Sr. figured since LaBelle's in Los Angeles, he's not going to try to expand into my fucking territory. But if I get his talent over in my market, then it'll be easier when I bring him in. And he did bring in a lot of guys from there. As a matter of fact, listen to the card that Mark was talking about. The Madison Square Garden show for February 26, 1973, the attendance was 22,098, up from the previous month of 22,096. That's when they were doing not only the sellout of the Garden, but they were closed circuiting to the Felt Forum next door, which later became the Paramount Theater, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, because then yes, the next month, 22,136 and 22,090, 22,146, 20,980. Business was down. Anyway, Susan Green and Lily Thomas defeated Peggy Patterson and Paula Kay. 2 out of 3 falls at 18-12. Who says the girls never got time in the WWF? Tony Gurria defeated Mike Conrad at 15:05. Mike Graham, Eddie Graham's son, defeated Joe Turco, who was a longtime enhancement guy up there at that time, 5:42. Listen to this one. It was booked to be Terry Funk versus Eddie Graham, which makes, all the sense in the world. But since Eddie Graham had to substitute for somebody later on in the show, Terry Funk defeated Chuck Richards. Do you know who Chuck Richards was?
That was Chris Candido's grandfather.
Chuck Popeye Richards, Chris Candido's grandfather, who worked with Terry Funk in the Garden. And that was the reason why, apparently, that Popeye got his shot at the big building, was that Eddie Graham was booked against Terry Funk, but there was another substitution, and they put Eddie Graham in that spot. But that's cool. Then it was booked the AWA World Champion Vern Gagne versus Ray Stevens, who had been working with Pedro Morales for the WWF title the previous few months in the Garden, and then he had been beaten decisively, and he was kind of going down the card. But at the same time, Ray Stevens was also with Nick Bockwinkel working for Vern Gagne, and there was a relationship there, obviously, because they were coexisting. So it's supposed to be Vern Gagne versus Ray Stevens, but Ray Stevens didn't show up at all. And who knows what the fuck? This was February. Was his plane snowed in? Who knows? But instead, Vern Gagne beat Eddie Graham, 14 minutes, 35 seconds.
Wow.
And that has to be a unique match, doesn't it? Would that have happened anywhere else at any time, at least in the modern era, when both of them were who they were?
Now that I think about it, I never even thought about this before. I can't think of too many times. I can't think of the Grahams and Vern in the same place.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it would have, I mean, at that point, when Vern would have been even going to Japan, Eddie would have been pulling back because he already owned Florida. I mean, they just really didn't coexist. They in the NWA meetings or promoters meetings, or in cases like that, yes, but never actually in the ring on shows or working. Again, by the 70s, Vern's schedule was he would work 3 or 4 of his big towns.
What was the date on the show again?
February 26, 1973.
Because another big part of the equation here is this is right after the war broke out in Georgia at the end of 72. And this is right when people need to work on relationship building.
Yeah.
And, eventually Bruno got talked out of working for Gunkel, but they tried to get Bruno. But Eddie Graham, this is a time where Vern Gagne was the most powerful person in the Midwest. Vince Sr., the most powerful person in the Northeast. And Roy Welch was getting up there in years. Eddie Graham was certainly trying to make himself the powerhouse behind the scenes in Southern wrestling with Florida and Georgia.
Yeah. And neither Nick or Roy would have been involved at that level in that fight anyway, because like you said, Roy was too old and nobody liked Nick that much. But the rest of the card, hold on, because we got something else. WWF World Champion Pedro Morales pinned King Curtis in 5 minutes and 37 seconds. So the World Championship match that drew, that was basically the advertised main event. 22,000 people went 5 minutes. Victor Rivera defeated, and you talked about the Los Angeles TV. Victor Rivera had been was working the WWF at this point in time regularly, but had been over on the goddamn Los Angeles TV also. And he beat Dory Funk Sr. 11 minutes and 45 seconds. This was 2 or 3 months before Dory Sr. died, was it not?
Yeah.
I can't remember what month he died
A few
in.
months before, but yeah.
But it wasn't, they didn't bring Dory Funk Sr. to, and Dory and Terry had worked a tag match, I'm going to say in November or December, sometime before that. Dory was not only the head of Amarillo, the Amarillo territory, which again, maybe Vince Sr. was out and let him have it, right? It's fucking West Texas. But he was also one of the most powerful decision makers in the NWA because of his sons, because of his track record, and because he's the one that taught fucking Eddie Graham. So, so you've got all these fucking minds getting together that year in the Garden to just, and also for the fans, it was, we are the mecca of wrestling, and we're featuring the major stars from all over the country, actually all over the country, with people we want to work with, right? That have some in with us. You know, it's too bad that Eddie Graham, Dory Sr., and fucking Vince Sr. didn't get together and take over the world. It might have been different. And then finally, Mil Mascaras beat Buddy Wolf in the last match to send the people out.
This is the early portion of the period of time where it was just an incredible hot streak at the Garden that went until the early 80s. You know, after they got back on regular TV and they were able to give up the spot they had on the Spanish language channel to Mike LaBelle and Eddie Graham, and the new Garden opened, all of a sudden, you know, starting with the Pedro run, continuing through the Bruno second run, into Billy Graham, into Backlund, up until the early part of Hogan, you know, and around, 86, 87, they stopped selling out every time. Somewhere in there, maybe 85.
Yeah.
But it's an incredible hot streak that didn't let up.
Well,
again,
now I'll tell you,
how many of those shows had the Felt Forum open, like you said? I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, you see the numbers 20,900, 20,600, 22,102 or whatever, but here's what, listen to this. November 1973, 16,148. May have been bad weather, but televised on HBO, as you'll recall, the early Garden shows were when nobody fucking had HBO. But on this card, Dick Slater, who would have been in 1973 working in Florida, I believe. Iron Mike McCord, who would later on become Austin Idol. Vern Gagne was on the card again. Andre in the main event. And, you know, through this year, you have other people from other territories.
That's interesting too, Andre. Because this would have been, and again, I don't have the dates in front of me, but this would have been around the period of time where Andre kind of switched from Vern control to Vince control.
Yes.
Or Vince Sr. control.
Well, and originally Montreal control, and Vern was his booking agent in the United States, but he was still based out of Montreal. But then by 1974, Vince Sr. is the one who sent him on the first nationwide tour of all the territories that he did. And so he had him, well, as a matter of fact, hold on, I just scrolled again. I shouldn't have scrolled, but I will find it. November 12th, Strongbow and Andre beat Blackjack Lanza and Stan Stasiak. Andre beat Jack Lanza on October 15th. I don't specifically know if that was Andre's first appearance in the Garden, but he seems to be starting regularly about that time. But there you have it, Brian. What did we have? I forgot what the Mark Cole wanted to know why all these people were in the same place at the same time without knifing each other.
There's a lot of interesting Garden cards, mixed amongst the regular Northeast regulars. Just random people. You're like, wow, what are they doing there against Johnny Rods?
What? April 29, 1974, Robert Fuller pinned Ed Sullivan. I have no idea who the fuck Ed Sullivan even was, but
It was a really big match.
Robert Fuller would not even get
His a really big
push.
schlong.
Well, now maybe that's why he got the really big push.
Welcome to Talk of the Town.
But he hadn't got a singles push in Tennessee yet. That came later in 74 for him. So he was just,
That was
he
Eddie
was
Graham.
there.
That was Eddie Graham sending up his partner's, family. That's what it was. Right, but it would have been his partner's kid because that was after the switch. So Buddy Fuller was his partner in Florida.
Well, there you go. Politics and wrestling make strange bedfellows.